world, and that demands just one understanding. That is, how does gravity truly works? And if it is a function of the structure of the vacuum, Einstein described it as a curvature in space, but in my theory, it became clear that it's not just that the curvature in space is actually the result of a torque, of the distortion of space by torque, or a spin in space. Then you can see very quickly that you could engineer devices to curve space-time and start producing lift. And if you can do that, you can move your society off the surface. And, that might sound outrageous to say, but I assure you that any civilization in the universe that ever made it past, their technological developments, most likely at one point or another had to get off the surface. If they survived, they had to get off the surface because planetary systems are not that stable. And it's actually remarkable that this one is still going after all these years, when we could have got hit by a meteorite, we could have got hit by a huge sun flare, all sorts of things could have happened that would have made this planet completely dead. And so there's a limited amount of time, and it's crucial that we learn to interact with the universe in a harmonious way, and we eventually move our civilization past the surface of this planet. And as soon as we do this, many, many stressors that are on our society will go away. One of them is that we're probably going to stop fighting for space. If we have access to, the solar system, even if we have access to the galaxy, right away, we're going to have so much more to explore, so much more space, so much more goods, and the concept of warring because of the scarcity of goods, because of the assumption that there's not enough for each other, for each of us, goes away. And that really changes our world.
You mentioned anti-gravity. We don't have to go back thousands of years. Are you familiar with Ed Lee Scanlon and the Coral Castle in South Florida?
Yes, I am.
What do you think? What did he know that we don't know?
Well, I think one thing he knew is how to engineer the vacuum, how to use the structure of space to produce curvature, and and it might be much more simple than we think. And I think that the key element in there is spin. And as well, this type of technology leads as well to, being able to have an enormous amount of energy available to us and so on. And so it solves very fundamental problems in our evolution. And there may have been a very specific map left for us by this advanced civilization I was mentioning earlier in ancient texts and ancient monuments around the world that need just to be decoded so that we can understand these fundamental principles of creation, replicate them in advanced technology, and transform our world.
I always, whenever I go to Coral Castle, I have two questions in mind. He was a poor immigrant without any education. So I have two questions. How did he learn the technology, one? And two, why didn't he share it with humanity?
Well, I don't know. Those are difficult questions to answer. I wasn't a friend of his, and I wasn't, but I would speculate that, I always say this. I say, if we would have taken a different path in the evolution of our science, for instance, according to my theory, if the schools of Pythagoras were not burned to the ground, early, and most of the information that was there lost, and if the world would have followed suit with the science based on what Pythagoras and his followers were working on, which had very much to do with the geometry of space, the harmonics produced by it, spin and so on, I think we would live in a completely different world. So I think there was a lot of bifurcation moments in our evolution that were not capitalized on by our society and that were actually discouraged. So an individual with very little education most likely has more chance to come up with these concepts than someone with a very large level of education, because
mind control.
Because these principles, are principles of nature, and if you get highly educated and the education you're getting is actually not giving you the right picture, it's like you're being led in the wrong direction, and there's a good chance you're not going to be able to find it.
So it's the proverbial, those people without education don't have to be in the proverbial box, that you have to step out of that box to be able to see what's real out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Einstein is a good example. He wrote relativity while he was working as a third class, patent clerk in Switzerland, and he couldn't find a job in physics. He was thought to be, too erratic and so on. In Switzerland, not being able to find a job, especially at that time, was really unusual in the field that everybody in Switzerland, and especially at that time when they graduated, they had a job waiting for them because there was no unemployment. So, it's found in many different, instances that individuals that usually are self-driven, that are independent, typically come up with theories that transform the world.
Let's continue with 2012. What are your thoughts on the Mayan and Hopi prophecies?
The Mayan and Hopi prophecies, first of all, they're very similar, but as well, I think in many cases, they're not quite appropriately interpreted. Commonly, for instance, they talk about this time in our history as a time of ascension. Well, the tendency is to think of an ascension of consciousness. I would agree with that. I mean, I think that we are going through an ascension of consciousness due to the stressors that are found in our evolution all over. But as well, but I think that when they were talking about that, they were actually talking about literally ascending, literally getting off the surface and, transforming our society, transforming our relationship to the universe. If everybody saw the Earth from space, I think everybody would have a sense that we're all one, much easier. They would have better sense that we're all on the same planet, that we're all on the same boat, and that we need to collaborate. And that
no boundaries.
Yeah, and that right there, would, create a large change in our consciousness. So, evolution of technology and evolution of consciousness are always hand in hand, and we're certainly seeing an evolution in our consciousness levels, and so an evolution in our technology is crucial at this point.
So, in the opinion of Nassim Haramein, will 2012 be a real Nexus event or the equivalent of another Y2K?
I think we're in the Nexus event right now. I think the change is occurring right now. I mean, look at our financial collapse that's occurring on our planet. Our system are failing. Changes are occurring very rapidly. I mean, a few years ago, you would have never thought that there would be an African-American president at the head of the United States of America. The change is happening right now. And I like not to